right now. And first up, we have West Virginia University undergraduate researcher Stephanie Karczhevsky, who will be discussing drinking water treatment methods to reduce THMs. Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Sorry, the Zoom screen is in the way. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, hello. Again, my name is Stephanie Karczhevsky, and I'm an undergraduate student at WVU. I'm going to give an overview on this research project I've been a part of since February entitled Drinking Water Methods to Reduce. Dr. Lynn brought me on, also Melissa O'Neill, Rachel Pell, and Jason Philhart. To begin, I'm just going to give some brief background information. Disinfection byproducts are what form as a result of the reaction between natural organic matter that is present in effluent and a disinfectant such as chlorine or ozone. The formation of disinfectant byproducts is usually a greater concern for water systems that use surface water, such as rivers, lakes, and streams as their source. The two most prominent classes of disinfection byproducts are trihalomethanes and haloacetic acids. Trihalomethanes are a group of 4 chemicals, and you can see the structures of these 4 chemicals on this slide. With trihalomethanes, it is usually in rural low-income water systems that we see experiencing the most violations, and repeat violations are also extremely common in the violation hotspots. On this slide, we have haloacetic acids. So these are organic compounds containing chlorine and or bromine. Levels of haloacetic acids in water can vary from day to day, depending on things such as the amount of acid in the water, the season, water temperature, concentration of chlorine, and the amount of plant material in the water. And the established maximum for haloacetic acids applies to the combined amount of all 5. So overall, this study focused on evaluating methods within the drinking water treatment process or distribution system for reducing THMs. And our objectives were the following: to identify knowledge gaps in research and information associated with the formation of THMs and haloacetic acids, to identify areas where significant further research is warranted, to make recommendations on the focus of future research, to produce a peer-reviewed journal article that will be published and presented, and to convey information to treatment plant operators so that they may better manage their respective facilities. To begin the project, we first knew we had to find drinking water facilities that were willing to participate and help us in the research. So we first began calling around, and we saw who wanted to participate, and we ended up with 4 really great facilities to work with. So on this slide, you can see the 4 facility locations and the flow rates. You can see that they have a lot of variety among them, and that there are several larger facilities, and then Preston County PSD1, that was a smaller and more rural facility. While they're all located in the Monongahela River Basin and they all utilize surface water, each of them is a bit different. So for the Westmoreland County McKeesport plant, that gets its water from the Yakagani River. Mub draws from the Monongahela River, Preston from a reservoir on Deckers Creek, and Fairmont gets its water from the Tigard Valley River. So after talking with the facilities, we were able to retrieve data from them. And after analyzing the data, we created a few charts to detail the trends for the haloacetic acids and THMs. So on this slide, we have the THM data, and you can see that in each of the pie charts, chloroform is the highest. On this slide, we have our pie charts for the haloacetic acids, and you can see that it's dominated by the dichloroacetic acid with very small amounts of the brominated forms. Overall, we found that on average, 22% of the THMs were brominated and less than 2% were brominated for the haloacetic acids. The levels of these forms also indicate that the majority of the disinfection byproduct issues for these facilities stem from the chlorination process rather than bromide contamination in the source water. In addition to talking to them and gathering data, we also toured each facility, and we were able to see the unique treatment processes of each. So some of the methods utilized by the participating facilities include measures at the treatment step as well as distribution. Treatment methods can include the reduction of precursors and chlorine alternatives, and these were covering clarifiers, ultrafiltration membranes, chlorine dioxide, and peracetic acid. And then the distribution methods included routine flushing, and that was on a monthly basis or however often the treatment facility felt necessary. And then last was power vents and mixers in the distribution tanks. To sum up our major problems and findings, we have the following 5 points. So the first issue was the trade-off between proper disinfection and the limitation of disinfection byproducts. A second problem was the lack of valuable continuing education opportunities for operators, as well as opportunities for drinking water facilities, regulatory agencies, and researchers to get together to talk about the issues and share their information and experiences. Third, we heard from these facilities that they needed more technical support. 4 was generally disinfection byproduct issues are more common in the rural and consecutive system, and research in this area is very limited right now. And then lastly, 5 is that the haloacetic acid issues are equally as prolific as the THM issues. This was something that we were surprised to find out, and we found out about it really early on in the research. These findings are significant because they showed us the following things. So first is that regional research efforts would be best focused on the distribution system, including tank mixing methods, chlorine booster stations, and optimization of flushing. And these methods would have the largest impact on consecutive systems and would be the most practical and cost-effective for the rural systems. Second, future studies should consider management of the THMs and HAA5s concurrently. And third, studies should focus on DBPs produced through the chlorination process while continuing to monitor potential bromide contamination in the source water. Our project had 2 outcomes. First was the virtual meeting series, and the goal of these meetings was to connect and promote information sharing between the drinking water facilities, regulatory agencies, and researchers. All the sessions ended up being very successful and they were very well attended. The recordings are also available on the website if you're interested in viewing them. Our second outcome was the white paper that's still under development. And the paper is important because these issues are not isolated to only West Virginia, but there's also problems with THMs and the haloacetic acids in drinking water globally. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that presentation. Since we do have a couple of minutes, I just want to open up the floor because Stephanie does have to run to a final. So I just want to make sure that she has a moment to address any questions from the audience before she leaves us for the day. Feel free to type anything in the chat or come off of mute.
Just a question, the inclusion of the smaller water facility that I think was Preston County, was that intentional? Like that was intentional to include that to just get like a insight into a smaller facility as well? Was that an intentional inclusion?
Yeah, it was an intentional inclusion. We wanted to see both the larger and smaller facilities.
And did you gain any specific insight from that?
We noticed that there were more issues with Preston County because they had less resources available to them. And I think it was very helpful for them during the virtual meeting series to be able to talk with some of the larger treatment water facilities to gain insight for them and see what methods were working for them so that they could try those out.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. Do you have any recommendations for additional studies or further studies?
Sorry, I'm thinking about it a little. I'm trying to come up with something different than what we said before. I would say that more studies could probably be done with a greater number of water facilities. And if you were able to see like what treatment methods were being most used and most successful, then you can compare those. Like if you had more data from a greater number of facilities.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, I think a larger data set would definitely be able to add more to the study for sure. That's something that is a great addition to the amazing study that you guys have already conducted. So that's a great point. I don't want to hold you up anymore. I know that going into a final is very stressful. So we'll go ahead and thank you for your time today and wish you the best of luck. I'm sure you're going to do amazing on your final coming up, Stephanie.
Thank you, guys.
Have a great holiday season. We'll see you in 2022.
Bye. Have a great holiday.
All right. Well, off to a great start with some great presentations. Up next, we have Leslie Hopkinson. Sorry about that. Associate Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering here at West Virginia University. So Leslie, the floor is yours.
Morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here to talk with everybody today. I'm here today to talk about our project, Fine Coal Sediment Transport Analysis, where we looked at erosion and potential sediment motion on a reclaimed impalement. On this project, worked with Dr. John Caranta with also with Civil and Environmental Engineering, and Melissa O'Neill with the Water Research Institute. Okay, so we're focused on coal impalements in this study. Coal refuse impalements are constructed as earthen embankment dams, which concentrate coal refuse. They retain process water that contain coal coarse and fine refuse fractions. That picture in the top is the impalement that was the site of our study before reclamation. The coal refuse impoundments in Appalachia region are primarily constructed as cross valley structures. So we have an embankment across the valley, impounding the refuse and the water upstream in the valley. And you can see the basic structure for that, the basic design for that in the bottom two figures. These are typically situated in upstream valleys. And at the end of its life, it's required to be reclaimed. And the typical reclamation is that they're constructed to provide positive drainage off the site to eliminate ponding. Our objective in this study was to evaluate runoff and sediment loads of an abandoned coal refuse impoundment. And we did that through both characterizing a reclaimed location and doing a little bit of modeling. This is our reclaimed impoundment. I kept the picture in the top left. That's the impoundment prior to reclamation. It's located in Barber County. At the beginning of our study, reclamation had just started. And so we saw through the reclamation process and then characterize the data characterize the site, post-reclamation. The impoundment is approximately 29 acres. It was regraded to remove ponding, and the design has a series of external drainage channels and a uniform 2.4% slope into those channels. And then at the end of reclamation, it was seeded with a native grass mixture. It's my understanding that the site in the future might be used as a hayfield or for cattle. And you can kind of see a better, a plan of the design in the top left picture here. Those are contour lines on the crown of the site showing a uniform 2.4% slope into external channels. So once the reclamation was completed, we went out to characterize the site. And to do that, we did some field measurements with infiltration. And we used a turf tech infiltrometer in the bottom right figure. We had a little bit of trouble with this. Every time we went out to the site, we did observe ponding. And so we were unable to get good infiltration measurements. We had no infiltration with greater than an hour of a test for multiple tests, or we weren't able to get a good seal, and we weren't able to get a good measurement that way either. So we were kind of, but we did observe ponding at the site every time we visited. And then we went to characterize the ground cover, the slope, and the soil characteristics. And for the modeling purposes, we divided the site into 3 hill slopes. You can see in the top figure, kind of uniform hill slope cutting across the crest where it's having that shedding the 2.4% away from the crest. And you can see in the bottom left figure our sampling locations for one of the days that we went out and did sampling. Along a transect within each hill slope, we took random locations and measured ground cover using our point frame. And the point frame, we identified locations in a 1 square meter section, whether point locations were either bare and had no cover, had the straw or the mulch cover that was applied during seeding, or had grass. And so the picture in the top is the grad student making that measurement. And this is one of the field sites really close after reclamation. So primarily you're seeing the straw, I think, that they used as their mulch. We also took soil samples in the top 6 inches at each location, composited those and brought those back to WVU. The grad student analyzed those for soil texture characteristics, and we sent some, also sent them to the WVU soil testing lab for some other information. We also verified the slope, the 2.4% slope within each hill slope, and we found that the hill slope was very close to the design slope, usually ranging between 2 and 2.5%. So just some quick summary of what we found in the site conditions. The grass, native grass seed mixture really took off, and we had a combined, when we're concerned about erosion control, we really just want to know if there is cover to reduce that rainfall impact. That's one reason. And so we counted both cover by straw and cover by grass. And so we had ground cover greater than 70% for all hill slopes, which is a high coverage rate. And this is showing the soil texture or the soil gradation curve. We brought the soil samples in, and the purpose here was to identify percent sand, silt, and clay so that we could use this information in the modeling. Once we characterized the site, we did move forward with erosion prediction using the Water Erosion Prediction Project modeling system, otherwise known as WEP. This is a process-based erosion prediction model. It requires information, soil information, management information, which is really related to the ground cover for our case, and hill slope information. And we modeled each hill slope as a uniform 2.4% slope. So you can see the top figure is a screenshot of some of the inputs for the soil information. Bottom left figure is showing how we divided in 3 hill slopes initially to characterize the site. And the bottom figure is showing the process-based model kind of divides it in layers and into that soil information, management, and slope. So first we characterized the site as is and did modeling for erosion modeling for each hill slope individually. And this kind of breaks down information of the basic slope profile that we used for each hill slope, the uniform 2.4% design slope. And we also used what we learned from our field measurements to characterize the soil inputs. Soil texture, we determined with sandy loam for all hill slopes. And we also identified percent sand, silt, and clay. There was no rock in our samples. We did that at the WVU Geotech Soils Lab. From the WVU Soil Testing Lab, we determined CEC and percent organic matter. And then the other parameters here, inter-rill erodibility, critical shear stress, and effective hydraulic conductivity. These are based on empirical relationships that were primarily based on soil texture and also included in the model. And these parameters kind of define how particles initiate motion and then how fast they move or how easily they move. So initially we ran wet modeling for single storm events for TR55, single storm predictions. This is assuming precipitation takes a type 2 distribution, and we did the modeling for the 2, 5, 10, 25, 50, 100, and 500 year storm events. Not a lot of variability among in runoff or soil loss among the sites, but we did see some variability in soil loss when we got to the higher frequency storm events. But we use those models so that we could do initial runs to understand if any reclamation-based decisions could be provided for reducing predicted erosion rates. And for this, we took our basic inputs that we had defined from the field, and then we completed 100 simulations where we varied the inputs based on normal distributions. And so you can see how our inputs varied for the different soil parameters that we varied in our randoms distribution there. And then we also analyzed variations in slope, the 2.4 design slope. Typically, these reclaimed areas by regulation or the slopes are kept as 4% or less. So we also modeled that upper end of 4%, and we also looked at outside of the range at 5% to see if we found statistical differences. So our results here with these 100 simulations, we found no differences in runoff around the reclamation slope treatments, but we did find difference in soil loss when we were comparing among the slopes. So we had difference in soil loss for every slope, increasing soil loss with each slope, with increasing slope. We also evaluated the sensitivity of each soil input parameter, looking at organic matter, clay, sand, cation exchange capacity, real erodibility, critical shear, silt, and effective hydraulic conductivity, excuse me. We found that wet runoff was sensitive to effective hydraulic conductivity. We found that wet sediment loss was sensitive to effective hydraulic conductivity, critical shear stress, real erodibility, and percent sand. And just a reminder that those parameters, effective hydraulic conductivity, real erodibility, and critical shear were calculated based on empirical equations. These were primarily based on texture characteristics, but the effective hydraulic conductivity relationship also considered land cover information. So to summarize, we characterized the impalement and the field impalement, and we used that to do some erosion modeling. Our conclusions to date, we found that wet sediment loss was sensitive to effective hydraulic conductivity, critical shear, real erodibility, and percent sand. We did find that there were differences in predicted soil loss when we evaluated and by changing the slope. We found differences between the 2.4, 4%, and 5%. This is supporting that range and keeping the slopes low. But however, we did see ponding on the site, and we were expecting to see the intent is to reduce ponding after post-reclamation. From the information and the characterization of the site that we did, we are now moving forward with a new project that's funded by Office of Surface Mining, where we're considering a watershed-based approach to reclamation of similar types of impalements. And we're using this as a case study, as a field site in that existing project as well. A few products, if you want to learn more, we do have a student thesis that's related to the initial setup of the wet model, and our more recent results were presented in a poster at the Summer Undergraduate Research Symposium at WVU, and that information is available online. And that's all I have today. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Leslie. That was extremely informative and really interesting. One question that I have just coming to my mind, just purely based off interest, was there any association between infiltration rates and the different slopes where it was getting to a higher percentage outside of that 2 to 4% range, where you saw less infiltration in the soil, or was there any association or anything like that?
Well, so we only measured, we attempted to measure the infiltration several times, and we attempted at different locations on the site, at that crest and along, in other places, but we were never able to get a good measurement. And, we did observe ponding, so I think it was just saturated every time we visited.
Leslie, what kind of improvements do you think could have been made to the site in order to reduce ponding and limit the amount of erosion?
Well, so I think the ponding was due to a couple of things. So when we visited post kind of some major storm events
Okay.
couple times, and so I think that was related to it, and it was really soon after reclamation. I mean, the reclamation had concluded within months of our visit. So I think if we continue to go out there, maybe we'll see a difference. So I don't know if the ponding, I think that's something, since we're using it as a field site in the future, I've hoped that we can maybe grab some more information to see if that continues. Yeah, I don't think that we could, I think perhaps that might improve with the future post reclamation.
So give it a little bit of time and then.
Yeah, well, and also
visit
just
yes.
visit it. I don't know if you remember, I think it was early spring, and it had been, it seemed every time we planned a field campaign to go out there, it was right after some significant event. So I think that may have part of it as well.
Try and go back in the fall after a significant period of
Not the day
precipitation.
after a significant event.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank
sorry. You mentioned the percent coverage with grass, and you mentioned that was like a high percent. It was like in the 70s percentage covered with grass. And then I was kind of surprised by the amount of sand there as well. Do you have any insight into, like, it seems like that maybe the quality of the soil was fairly decent to be able to get that amount of coverage. Is that an appropriate insight, or am I thinking incorrectly about that?
Yeah, so they did bring in cover. So that's top. They cap it at I think it was 1 foot of cap over prior to reclamation. So they did and they really prioritized the quality there because of the intended post land use. And I think they did a really good job at finding a native seed mixture and supporting. They also when had problems reseeded. So, and that 70% is kind of a target for permit release for things.
All right.
So did you have
Leslie.
any big surprises during the study, or did it sort of turn out the way that you thought that it would?
So I think what we focused on really the crown, but I think that for instability, we needed to look in the future, we're going to need to look outside of the crown because that's where we were seeing some instability. And so kind of more of a full watershed outside of the drainage to understand those impacts. So I think in the future, we'll expand the footprint for analysis, if that makes sense.
Great, thanks, Leslie. I just want to take a moment and allow anybody else that has any other questions to either type them in the chat or come off of mute. We do have a couple of minutes that we can allow for questions at this point before we jump into our last presentation for the day. All right, well, if you do have any questions as we continue through our presentations, like I said, please feel free to type them in the chat and we will go ahead and address them after our final presentation. Thank you so much, Leslie. That was an extremely interesting presentation. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the next project ends up going for you. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and we'll jump into our final presentation for the day. This is from Matthew Williams, who is an assistant professor with the biology department at West Virginia University Tech. So Matthew, the floor is yours.
So I went to share and now I can't see it. Are y'all seeing the slideshow now? All right, awesome.
Yep.
Fortunately or unfortunately, I have not had to Zoom much this semester with teaching, so I've been very happy about that. But I'm kind of out of the virtual meeting expertise right now. So, all right. So, our project was a collaborative water quality evaluation of Piney Creek, which is an important tributary of the New River Gorge National Park. So again, America's newest national park down here in the southern part of West Virginia. Again, we set up this project back before it became national park. Obviously, we care greatly about this area, even though it was a national river prior to being the national park. But now there's a lot more people that seem to be interested in our waterways down here because of that new designation. So a major objective of our project was really community involvement and student experience. So when we developed the project, those were like objective points 1 and 2 were to get the community involved and to give experience to our students here at WVU Tech. Unfortunately, our students don't get a lot of experience opportunities, and that was a big part of the genesis of this project, is to really get students involved. If you notice there, right there on my title slide, there are 20 students listed on this because they were all extremely valuable partners in this project. Again, we really looked to collaborate on this project, and we were very successful in getting a collaboration built and students involved. So what is this Piney Creek I mentioned? What is this tributary down here in the southern part of the state? So Piney Creek Watershed is located down in the southern part of West Virginia in Raleigh County. It drains approximately 136 square miles. The watershed itself is home to approximately 48,000 residents, most of whom live in the area of Beckley. If you notice there in that map, it's the kind of the tannish colored area of that map. About 28 of the 48,000 residents are concentrated in that tan area. So again, the largest city in our watershed is Beckley. Again, most residents are there. They ended up being the location of our sampling was mostly right there near Beckley, just for accessibility purposes. But the watershed itself obviously is quite a bit bigger. But fortunately, most of the upper extremities of the watershed do end up flowing past Beckley. Piney Creek itself flows through Beckley. So again, we were able to grab samples at some convenient locations rather than traveling out to some more rural, inaccessible sites. Again, what a lot of people are interested in with this is that the Piney Creek watershed, it does ultimately drain into the New River. So it does drain into the New River at the New River Gorge National Park. So at a little town called McCreary, again, within the confines of the New River Gorge National Park is where Piney Creek flows into the New River. So again, as I already mentioned with the title slide, our main objective was really to have this water monitoring program. Big part of the objective of this was to have community data collection, community involving the students here at WVU Tech as well. And then of course we wanted to take all of that data, get it organized in some sort of understandable manner, and then start analyzing the data. Again, as part of the project, we also purchased and built some remote water monitoring stations, so I'll mention that as well. So why do we care about this? I've already given you some insight into where Piney Creek flows into. Obviously, it flows through a major population area of Beckley. So there are a lot of these tributaries of Piney Creek itself that flow through people's backyards. There are children recreating in this water. There are numerous people recreating in the waters of Piney Creek. But unfortunately, Piney Creek itself is listed as an impaired stream, especially for fecal coliforms. So it was in 2008, it was listed, 303 delisted as being impaired for fecal coliforms. Again, it's draining into this major site of recreation as well as draining into the New River where there's rafting and swimming and fishing and everything else. So again, that was kind of our problem, is that we have this impaired stream draining it that is excellent, would be excellent for recreation, and of course the ecology and environmental impacts as well. And then the other problem is, we have a major a fairly good sized campus here with not a lot of experiences for our students. So our local undergraduate students need some education and experience opportunities to help drive their careers. So we developed this project to be able to look at the watershed, look at the waterways, and also get our students and community involved in this project, so they could be involved in all aspects of the project. So our students get involved with things like planning, they help inventory, they help actually go out and do the sampling, they help with data entry, data analysis. It's been a very successful project. So where are these sample sites to where we're going every month? Again, this kind of gives a just aerial overview or satellite overview. Our sampling sites, we did try to make them accessible since we wanted community and student involvement as key parts of this project. What you're seeing here is a satellite image of the eastern area of the city of Beckley. It's actually, most of these are fairly close to the university. We have these 21 sites. So again, we do go out every month to these 21 sites and sample for numerous parameters. But Piney Creek itself is flowing right along. If you notice the airport there on the top right side of the image, that's Piney Creek flowing just to the left of that. Again, many of the sample sites that we're getting are actually tributaries going in. We do have a few sites there near that little town designated as Glen Morgan, the P1, P2, P3. Those are actually catching Piney Creek itself. As I mentioned a couple times, we're very big on collaboration and community involvement. So really the three players that helped start this, of course, myself, I put a plug for myself there, but also we collaborated with our local sanitary board, the Beckley Sanitary Board. So there in the middle of that image, you see Luke Stevens, who's the environmental scientist from the Beckley Sanitary Board. You also see Danielle Stewart, who's was the executive director of the Piney Creek Watershed Association. So these three entities were really the ones that have driven this project, WVU Tech, the Beckley Sanitary Board, and Piney Creek Watershed Association. So we started ideas for this back in 2008. We started sampling in 2019, and then the USGS funding really funded us for all of 2020, and then a good part of our efforts in 2021. Again, just some images, because I love images of people out in the creeks. Again, a lot of it's not actually in Piney Creek itself. We do sample all these tributaries and waterways that are flowing into Piney Creek. So I get in trouble with the students sometimes because I show them the nice images, like the cover image I showed there, beautiful Piney Creek, but then I take them out to sample, and they always get on to me for sampling in a parking lot next to a dumpster down in a ditch. So, but unfortunately, that is where a lot of the sampling does take place. That makes it very accessible for students. And then sometimes we do get out into the more beautiful areas like Piney Creek itself. So these images are some other students down in actual Piney Creek. So one of my favorite sites is the one on the right there. It's our P3 site, which is our furthest downstream in Piney Creek, getting close to where it actually drains into the New River. Again, you see I do actually get out and sample myself. The other name you might notice on the title slide is the other PI on the project. So Dr. Adrienne Williams, she does a lot on the data entry, data analysis side. And what kind of data do we gather? Each month we go out, we sample for Escherichia coli, we do total coliforms, we do total suspended solids, total dissolved solids, pH, conductivity, dissolved oxygen, temperature. We also make some record of the weather, the water observations, algae color and algae density, general flow observations. For part of the project, we did actual flow measurements in our little waterways. Sometimes it's just very difficult to get flow. So we've tried numerous different ways. A flow meter doesn't work because sometimes the flow is so low that it is difficult to get a flow meter spinning. We do a velocity head rod method now that seems to be working fairly well. We used to do the float method where you take like oranges or orange pills and put in, and then that just, again, doesn't really work in small waterways, but velocity head rod method works fairly well. So we're getting back to getting flow more frequently. So again, just to show some of the data and what we're getting from it. Again, this is showing 2019, 2020. We'll be analyzing our 2021 data. And we just collected the final month this week. Actually, I have to go count colonies right after this meeting, but we'll be getting the 21 data together. But again, we track all this for each of those parameters I mentioned earlier, but ultimately it's helped to give us some insight into what's happening in our watershed and the different subwatersheds, so we can analyze the data, organize it into different subwatersheds. So here we have a subwatershed known as White Stick Creek. Then we have our actual Piney Creek sites. Little White Stick, that's another subwatershed of Piney Creek, and then Cranberry. And one thing we noticed are some of these huge spikes. We actually, when we see these large spikes in our data, we start asking questions as to why that is, and we're able to actually get together with like the nonprofit watershed association or the sanitary board and go out and see like what's going on at these sites. And we found things like, it might be after a large rain event and the sewer covers come off, or we found like a leaking pump station. So it's very nice to be out there every month and getting this data, because we can actually get people out there to see, like when we see a really large spike, we've gone out and we can see why we're having that spike. Again, if we start looking at things like averages to see where some of these major impairments are coming from, we noticed that Little White Stick subwatershed is where we're getting our highest averages. So what the red line there is like the recreational water quality standard. So we kind of use a cutoff of 200 CFUs per 100 mils. So if it goes over 200 colony forming units on the E. coli, that's considered not really safe for recreational use. And you notice Little White Stick Creek is on average at each of the sample sites on that subwatershed, it's on average over that. So again, it's our one with the highest averages. So that actually led us to investigating that in more depth. This past summer, we did a subwatershed plan. So the state helped sponsor a subwatershed plan. So we actually set up a internship for a summer intern of our undergraduate students. She spent the entire summer going out and investigating this subwatershed in a lot more detail and finding out where some of these coliforms are coming from. We found out we had a lot of sedimentation issues, a lot of erosion issues in this watershed, and there's a lot of ties between coliforms and sedimentation. So we're looking more into that now. She's actually turned that into her senior thesis and is actually going to try to get that as a published paper. So again, we've had a lot of successes with this. Again, overall though, like throwing all that data on there, what does it mean? What have we found? One of the things we've noticed is when we compare our data to the data back in 2008 that caused our watershed to become listed. In 2008, they were finding that 90% of their sampling events were exceedances. So they were exceeding that recreational water quality standard. Currently, from our data, we're only exceeding about 58% of the time. So, of course, the Watershed Association really likes to think this part of that is because of the projects they've implemented over the last 14, 15 years. So again, the Piney Creek Watershed Association has really done a lot. The sanitary boards around here have been really good about, as soon as we let them know that there's some sort of issue going on, they go out and they actually try to find where they have leakages. We've helped people with septic tanks. There have been septic tank repairs, there have been septic tanks installed in places where people were just straight piping. So it's been fairly successful project, and the other projects in planned, some other like 319 projects planned out there to try to get people help with their septic and sewer. But again, we're already seeing a potential reduction from what the numbers were back in 2008. We'd like to see that reduce even further. Again, we track a lot of different things. Total dissolved solids, that's kind of our next thing we want to get after our so we realized that this summer, a lot of our sedimentation, erosion problems, we have total suspended solids and TDS, fairly high levels. We see these spikes at certain times. That Little White Stick subwatershed, again, we found lots of erosion there, which kind of makes sense. So that's again another target for future projects. I did mention when I started off, we also received funding for these remote water monitoring stations. We did get those implemented. So these monitoring stations allow us to have continuous monitoring of things like dissolved oxygen, pH, temperature, a few other parameters. Again, this is something I integrated the students into. So here you see that summer intern that I mentioned. She's wearing her ACE Epic gear there in the maroon. Another student there on the left, Logan Bauer, has been essential to keeping this project going. But again, we integrated these. Again, this is something else that's given us a lot of insights, so we can track some of this data. We're swimming in data we don't know what to do with in many cases. one thing we noticed when we implemented these along the Cranberry Creek subwatershed, if you notice there, the water level track in blue, we see like all these dips and dives at regular intervals. And then we see the dips and dives in the dissolved oxygen. We found out that one of our, a separate local water utility was having some issues with their discharges. And again, now this allowed us to realize that because the water level there, that was corresponding with their discharges. So again, they didn't realize it. We were able to go in and say, hey, we see this issue with dissolved oxygen, what's going on? And we found out there was a little issue. They were able to sort it out. So it's nice being able to do the monthly sampling, but it's even better to have the continuous sampling. So we have to integrate more continuous sampling as we go. Again, overall, what did we find from this? A lot of data. We're still trying to analyze it. It's meant a lot to policy. It's meant a lot to these local entities to try to, actually boots on the ground, get things fixed, realize what's going on in the watershed, because it had been years since anybody tested our watershed. And now we're out there every month testing it, making some impacts, coming up with more projects. So hopefully it continues to grow. But to me, as a teacher, again, my main thing is teaching as a professor on a mostly undergraduate university, or mostly undergraduate campus. We've really gotten a lot of our students involved and connected. So we've had 20 undergraduate students trained in these techniques. 5 actually go to the lab, or additional 5 students also learn some lab techniques, so the microbiology side of it. And then we have students that they don't really like going to the field, so they help with the data entry and analysis. We've definitely engaged with the community. We have ongoing community engagement. And again, we have the data that we're just now trying to analyze. We've ended up with, we presented abstracts at the North American Lake Management Conference. We have 3 manuscripts that we've prepared and have been trying to get out. We've had some issues getting that out. I think part of it is I'm a medical microbiologist by training. I'm a public health biologist by training. I'm not a water biologist or water microbiologist. So definitely any collaborations of people that have much more experience in that, I'm definitely open to hearing. Because again, I'm not a water microbiologist. It's just kind of fallen into it from the medical and public health side. Again, my major outcome here is the students. We've really got the students involved. We've engaged with the community. And to me, that's a major success. So, any questions?
Hi, Matthew. I was wondering if you found this project was successful in connecting students with the watershed groups. I know a lot of groups struggle to find younger members. And so I was wondering if the students really were excited about working with the watershed groups, or maybe if any students continued working with them after the project.
Yes. So prior to this project, the watershed group, everyone who was active was retired. And now we have a lot of college students involved as well. So it definitely has changed the demographic of the Watershed Association, because that's one of the things the Watershed Association loves about it, is it went from being just a group of retirees to now being a lot more. We still kind of have like a split. You have the college students and the retirees, and not much in between except for a few of us. But yeah, it's definitely got the students involved with that. Actually, several students have taken what they've learned in this project and turned it into jobs. So we have a local environmental analysis company, and 4 of our students that started on this project now work for that company. And to me, that's a huge success too, to give them that experience that actually turned into a job. Some of them put the more public health spin on it rather than the ecology and water quality side. And that's fine too, because they're getting experience. So a lot of them have get involved because they like the public health aspect of it. And actually 3 of the students that were part of this project are now in med school.
Oh, that's great. And I think even just exposing students to watershed groups, hopefully later in their lives, they'll continue to be involved in their communities, because a lot don't know that those opportunities exist.
Yeah, I think so. Awareness is the first objective when you try and get people involved with environmental issues and so forth. And I think this has definitely created an awareness, and it's great that they've continued to go on and do great things in their personal careers, but also seem to be, some of them seem to be attached to that watershed group and sort of found a little bit of, I don't know, you want to call it like a sense of place or whatever with that watershed, right? So they have garnered interest in it now.
Yeah, definitely. And then, yeah, speaking to awareness, yeah, I mentioned how the students dislike when I take them to the ditch in the parking lot next to the dumpster, but then they don't realize like that flows into the creek that they want to recreate in. It's like, then they make that connection. They're like, oh, wait, I have to be careful of what I dump here because it goes there. Some of them they've not been taught that, and they gain that awareness, and it sticks with them, I think.
Yeah, somebody always lives downstream of somebody else. So yeah. That's great.
Great. Well, I just want to open the floor to any other questions that we may have. We are coming to the end of our session. So if there are any questions for any of the presentations that you've seen today, definitely feel free to come off of mute, ask our presenters, or you can type in the chat. While we're waiting for any questions, I do have just one question. You mentioned future projects. Are there any other tributaries to the New that you would like to focus on for future projects or anything in the site?
I have a vested interest in Piney Creek. Again, it's like Jason was mentioning, students getting connected to it. I'm connected to Piney Creek. There's a lot going on in Piney Creek. There's all, I think, just as of right now, I'm tied to Piney Creek. And we're starting to go further upstream, look at some of the things further upstream in Piney Creek. But as of right now, I'm not looking outside of Piney Creek
I completely understand that. Piney Creek definitely has a great community behind it. And I've actually been following the Piney Creek Watershed Association, and they have been doing great things in the past couple of years. So really great presentation. And I love your focus on community engagement and student engagement and providing students the opportunity to get out into the field and become connected more. So, well, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and we'll wrap it up for today. So I just want to thank you again for being here with us this morning. We hope that you found this informative session extremely interesting and beneficial to your area of focus. So with that being said, I will actually pass this along to Rachel, who wants to give a quick preview to another series that we are running concurrently with this virtual seminar. So Rachel, take it away.
Thanks, Kristen. So we are also hosting a three-part Three Rivers Quest Reach Roundtable, which is also monthly on Zoom, but it'll be the first Thursday of every month, whereas this is the third Thursday. And so our next session is actually focusing on research conducted by the 3 university partners that are involved in Three Rivers Quest. And that includes West Virginia University, Duquesne University, and West Liberty University. And they'll be covering different projects that they have going on in their watersheds. And then during the final session, we'll hear more from watershed groups that are involved in 3RQ. And so I'll put a link in the chat if anybody is interested in learning more about that or registering. And like I said, the first session will be the first Thursday in January.
Perfect. Thank you, Rachel. And I will as well drop a link for the future sessions of our seminar series. Of course, like Rachel said, this is a monthly series, and our next session is going to be on January 20th. And it's actually going to be focusing on programs and projects from the watershed point of view out of the Brownfields Assistance Center from West Virginia University. So definitely make sure to get registered for those upcoming sessions. We would love to see you there. And with that being said, I wish you all an extremely happy holiday season filled with great times with loved ones, and we will see you all in 2022. Have a great rest of your year and take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great day.